The 1980s gave us Amy Grant on MTV, a band called Stryper throwing Bibles into metal crowds, and Sandi Patti selling out arenas. This is the decade where Christian music finally got big. But here's the thing that most people won't tell you. The actual story of the 80s doesn't really start with Amy Grant or Michael W. Smith. It doesn't even start in the 80s. It starts in 1932 with a blues piano player whose wife had just died. This is part 4. Let's get into it. There's a man named Thomas Dorsey. If you don't know his name, you should. He's arguably one of the most important figures in the history of religious music. And almost nobody outside of gospel circles even knows who he is. Dorsey was born in 1899 in Georgia. By his teenage years, he was a working blues piano player in Atlanta. They called him Barrelhouse Tommy because he played the Barrelhouses, which were rough roadside bars where you could drink, gamble, and hire, entertainment. In other words, Dorsey learned music in the exact place that evangelical America was calling satanic. He toured with Ma Rainey, who's one of the greatest blues singers of all time. He co-wrote a song called It's Tight Like That in 1928 that sold 7 million copies.
Listen there, folks, wanna sing a little song. Don't get mad, but don't mean no harm. You know it's tight like that. Beat it up, boy, it's tight like that. Beat it up.
But Dorsey had this other thing pulling at him. In 1932, his wife Nettie went into labor when he was on the road. And by the time he made it home, she had passed away in childbirth, and the child had passed away as well. So Dorsey locked himself in the music room for 3 days, reportedly didn't eat or really sleep and didn't speak. And when he came out, he had written a song called Take My Hand, Precious Lord.
All on you. Let's go. Come on. Hit it.
Martin Luther King Jr. requested it as the last song he ever heard performed live. Elvis recorded it, Aretha Franklin, Whitney Houston, Johnny Cash, they all recorded this song. And in writing that song, Dorsey did something genuinely new. He took the chord changes and the emotion of the blues. The preachers were calling it evil, but he then applied it to Christian lyrics. And he called the result gospel music. He literally coined that term. That music sound traveled. Rock and roll learned it, then soul and R&B eventually learned it, and then eventually Christian music learned it too, although it took a little while. Okay, we're gonna be jumping. Fast forward to 1965, a guy named Andraé Crouch starts a group called The Disciples. His father was a Pentecostal minister in LA, and André had been playing piano in his church since he was 7. What André did was he took that deep tradition of black gospel music that Dorsey had built, smoothed out the edges, and he wrote songs that any church anywhere could pick up and sing. Songs like The Blood Will Never Lose Its Power.
Oh, from day to day, and it will never lose its power.
My Tribute.
To God be the glory. To God be the glory.
Through It All, Soon and Very Soon. If you've spent time around some of the Christian churches in the last 50 years, you've probably heard Andraé Crouch's music. You just probably didn't know it was him, for a reason coming up. And André didn't just stay in gospel. He sold out Carnegie Hall in 1975 and 1979. Then the mainstream pop world found him too. The gospel choir on Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, that's him. The choir in Madonna's Like a Prayer, that's also André. He worked with Quincy Jones, Elton John, Diana Ross. He was later nominated for an Oscar and is one of the most decorated, influential figures within religious music history. In 1982, he was pulled over and the police found a vial of something on him. He insisted that it was soup powder or that the substance was a friend's, but ultimately the charges got dropped, but the damage was done, and the CCM industry, which had embraced him a little bit, mostly stepped back and didn't want to talk about it. How interesting, another person not talked about by the CCM industry. The next wave came right behind André, a family from Detroit named the Winans. Mr. and Mrs. Winans had 10 kids, all of them musical in a Pentecostal household. And so the 4 oldest brothers became a group called the Winans.
God will understand. So now you feel justified to do your thing on the side and still say amen. Don't you be deceived. Don't you be deceived. Oh, you can't do your thing.
And they got discovered by Andraé Crouch. 2 of the younger siblings, BeBe and CeCe, started recording together as a duo.
Every beat in my heartbeat is your song.
Word and arm, you're my protection. Path I take is your direction.
In 1987, they signed with Sparrow Records that we discussed in the previous part. That sounds totally normal until you know that Sparrow, which had been founded 11 years earlier by Billy Ray Hearn, had never signed a black artist before BeBe and CeCe. They were the very first. Their 1988 album Heaven became the first gospel record in history to hit #1 on the Billboard sales charts. They were doing on R&B radio exactly what Amy Grant was going to be doing on pop radio. And at the same time, in the same year, 1988, a 6-man a cappella group called Take 6 released their self-titled debut.
Come unto me, your even labor, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon
They won the Grammy for the Best Soul Gospel Album and the Grammy for Best Jazz Vocal Performance, a Christian album. Take 6 went on to work with Quincy Jones, Stevie Wonder, Ella Fitzgerald, and they sang on Andraé Crouch's records. So here's what I want you to take from this whole stretch before we dive really hard into pop territory. Black gospel had its own publications, its own charts, and its own awards. CCM had its own. The infrastructure wasn't combined, but the black artists in the gospel lane were doing something that the CCM industry was watching very closely. André crossing over into mainstream pop production, BeBe and CeCe hitting #1 on the Billboard charts, Take 6 winning Grammys not in a Christian category. Religious music could cross over, and it could be commercialized, and it could sell. And as the labels in Nashville were watching this play out, they were realizing something. CCM can too. Okay, let's rewind some. Get ready. So 1982, Amy Grant was 21 years old. She'd been signed to Myrrh Records since she was 15. The idea of getting a record deal at 15 in 1976 is wild even by 70s standards. Her father was a doctor in Nashville and her family was well connected. And she had a really good voice.
In a little while we'll be home forever. In a while.
And then a familiar name, Billy Ray Hearn, signed her. By 1982, Amy had released 3 albums and they were fine. They were okay. Nothing crazy. And then she made Age to Age, produced by Brown Bannister, and released May 1st, 1982. The album sold 5,000 to 6,000 copies a week, every week, for 85 weeks straight. It became the first Christian album by a solo artist to be certified gold, then platinum. This was the first Christian album to sell 1 million copies, ever.
Religion and record sales travel the same path? For years, they haven't. Now, on the strength of some platinum and gold albums and a top 40 hit, Amy Grant is proving to be the exception to the rule.
I think it's tough when someone comes up to an artist who's been developing her craft for years and years and they say, you just remind me so much of so-and-so. You're thinking, I'm trying so hard to be an individual and I'm just like so-and-so. Because of that, I think that we're all constantly trying to push our limits.
Despite her success on the rock charts, on stage and off, Grant steadfastly clings to her Christian values.
I wish I could say, because we're on stage, we live life incredibly because we are affecting millions of little girls. But the truth is, we're all struggling through life too. Sometimes doing great, sometimes hanging on by a thread, and 1 million people are watching you.
Before Age to Age, the idea of a Christian album going platinum was basically a wild theory that would never happen. Amy Grant became overnight the first true pop star in CCM. She was on the adult contemporary charts and then nominated for Grammys and appeared on The Tonight Show. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for, a CCM artist who finally broken through the mainstream pop radio. And it set up the rest of the decade for an interesting experience. There's a piano-driven song on Age to Age called Sing Your Praise to the Lord. It's the opener of the album, and it's a beast. It's Bach-influenced and complex with a lot of classical meets pop sound arrangements. It genuinely doesn't sound like anything else on Christian radio at the time. The guy who wrote it was named Rich Mullins. He was 27 and unknown. Well, except for those who were familiar with his group Zion. Within a few years, he'd be his own kind of legend. The artist who refused to be a pop star while kind of becoming one, and who'd live on the average American wage and give away the rest of his money. Someone who would eventually become more interesting in death than most CCM artists were becoming in their life. I have a whole video on Rich Mullins' story. It's probably worth your time, but for our purposes here, just know that Age to Age made Amy Grant a star, and behind that star was a 27-year-old Indiana songwriter who was already rejecting this new idea of being a pop star. Okay, so 2 months after Age to Age comes out, on July 28, 1982, a guy named Keith Green got on a small plane in East Texas, and that plane never made it back safely. Keith was, in the late 70s and the early 80s, one of the loudest voices in Christian music.
Make my life a prayer to you. I wanna do what you want me to. No empty words and no white lies. No token prayers, no compromise.
And he was using that voice mostly to warn people about this exact thing that was about to happen.
The average audience is probably 60% church kids, kids that are in a fellowship and going to church, or some of them may have never really met Jesus. They're just following in on their parents' coattails or something. God doesn't have any grandchildren, Right. So they've got to come into that relationship with him. And what I do is I present the lordship of Jesus and the requirements of being his disciple. And a lot of people that figured they were saved because they went to church once a week, or that their parents were Christians and they figured they got in just because their parents were Christians, have come to realize that they'd never really submitted to the lordship of Jesus.
Keith had stopped charging for his albums in 1979, and he'd be giving them away to anyone who wrote in and asked for one. He wrote essays warning the church about commercializing the gospel. He really believed that CCM was about to lose its soul. He was very, very loud about that. And then, 2 months after the album that proved Christian music could go platinum happened, Keith Green was gone. I have a full story about Keith Green's life as well, but what you need to know is that his death and the arrival of full-blown commercial CCM happened about the same time. The loudest critic of where CCM was going didn't actually get to see where it went. So back to Amy Grant. While she was making Age to Age, there's a 24-year-old playing keyboards in her band. His name is Michael W. Smith. And by 1983, Reunion Records had signed him as a solo artist. His self-titled debut came out the same year. And by 1984, he had a song called Friends that became one of the most played Christian songs of the entire decade.
And friends are friends forever, if the Lord's the Lord of them.
But Michael didn't want to stay in the safe lane, so in 1986 he made an album called The Big Picture, which I've expressed in a previous video is my favorite.
When you went to love
It was synth heavy and influenced by U2 and the Talking Heads, but his label was really nervous about it. Christian radio thought it was too edgy, and so it became one of his most acclaimed albums, but one of his worst selling ones. By 1991, he'd push further. His song Place in This World hit number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. Not the Christian charts, the actual Billboard Top 100. So Michael became, for an entire generation of evangelical kids, the male equivalent of Amy Grant. And his story is much wilder than most people even know, and I have a full video on him as well if you want a deeper look. I know we're moving super fast, but stick with me because everyone in the industry is about to get a shock with their contracts. But let's talk about some other names real quick. While Amy was on her rise, something else was happening in Orange County. And that something was about to make a lot of Christian parents very nervous. Stryper formed in the early 80s, not as a Christian band. Two brothers, Michael and Robert Sweet, plus a couple of other guys. They were already a band before they were Christians, a glam metal band wearing yellow and black spandex. When they decided to make their band explicitly Christian, they didn't change their look, but they did change the lyrics. And by 1984 standards, this is a pretty wild idea. A Christian heavy metal band, this is a genre that didn't really exist before Stryper. So most Christians at the time literally believed that the rhythm of metal music and the screaming and loud singing was demonic. So Stryper shows up, big hair, yellow and black, and lots of drive turned up on their guitars. And they don't fit in anywhere. Secular music fans think they're cheesy or a joke, and one critic even called them a quiet riot singing Jesus music. And the Christian community was furious. Christian bookstores in 1984 wouldn't stock Stryper, Christian radio wouldn't play them, but Stryper kept showing up. They went on tours with Wasp, Motley Crue, Rat. They played in front of metal crowds that were drunk and high and not really interested in Jesus at all. And during the encore of every show, the band would throw out real Bibles into the audience. Bibles that they bought with their own money. They were very serious about their faith and about sharing it. The guys in Wasp said later that they couldn't figure out what to make of these guys. They weren't a joke. And in 1986, Stryper released To Hell with the Devil. It went platinum. 2 million copies, the biggest selling Christian rock album in history at this point. And guess what? The Christian establishment still hated them. It didn't matter that they were on MTV. It didn't matter that they were filling arenas and giving out Bibles. This is that same wall that we talked about in episode 1 again. Stryper pushed it, and the Christian music culture pushed back. And within about 10 years, though, every Christian music label was signing metal-adjacent acts. The thing that had been controversial had become the tradition once again. So while Amy was crossing over and Stryper was busy throwing Bibles at metalheads, there was a third lane, Sandi Patti.
How majestic is your name in all the earth.
Oh Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
If you grew up in the church in the 80s and you don't know who Sandi Patti is, I don't know what to tell you. She was everywhere. This inspirational adult contemporary thing she had completely locked down. She performed for President Reagan. She won so many Dove Awards that they had to keep adding categories. She was basically the safe version of CCM. No crossover ambitions, just ballads about Jesus. That's not to be dismissive, but it is worth noticing that Sandi Patti was what the Christian retail industry actually wanted. She fit cleanly within the bookstore model, and so radio played her on repeat. So when we talk about who was winning in the 80s, it's her. Her lane was enormous. All right, let's slow down a little bit from drinking out of this fire hose because I want to set up something that's going to come back hard in episode 6. In the previous episode, I mentioned that the major secular labels started getting involved in Christian music. ABC bought into Word, CBS started Priority, MCA started Songbird, and in the 80s, the major labels became central to how this whole thing is working. So let me walk through how a record contract actually worked in the 80s, because most people don't realize just how stupid it is. Let's say you're an artist. Let's say you're Stryper. You've got songs and you need a label. And so they look at you and they say, cool, we'll give you $250,000 to record your album. And you go, amazing, I'm gonna be rich. But what they didn't tell you is that $250,000 isn't a gift. It's a loan. It's called an advance. Every penny gets paid back out of your royalties. You don't see a dime of that royalty money until the advance is paid off. At an average royalty rate of 10 to 15%, you have to sell millions of dollars worth of records just to even break even with the $250,000. Oh, and one more thing. The label owns your master recordings forever. Even after the contract is over, your songs keep making money for them. This is how the music industry has worked since the 1950s, but Christian artists, more than most, were sold this relationship as ministry. We're investing in your calling. We're partners in kingdom work. A lot of these artists were like 20 years old and they just didn't read the fine print. They were just glad that someone wanted to make their record.
I'm John Ellis. I'm with the band Tree 63. I assumed that everyone who wrote music and sang and performed music, led worship for Jesus, was a Christian. I thought we'd gotten this, and it turned out we got this, right?
I'm not gonna beat a dead horse about this right now. We'll get into it more in a coming episode, but every artist we talked about in this episode, they were all operating under the same structure. So by 1991, Amy Grant was the biggest name in Christian music by a country mile. She had multiple platinum albums, she was a mom, and in a marriage with Gary Chapman that was by all accounts struggling. She had also put out her album Heart in Motion. This album wasn't really even pretending to be a Christian album. The lead single was a song called Baby Baby, and it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100.
I'm taken with the notion to love you with the sweetest of devotion.
A Christian artist had now the top-selling song in America. The album went 5 times platinum. Some fans loved it, but others felt completely betrayed. A handful of Christian bookstores actually refused to stock the album Heart in Motion because they argued that it wasn't really a Christian album, which they weren't entirely wrong about. It wasn't a Christian album. It was a pop album made by a person who happened to be a Christian. But then things started to fall apart privately. Amy's marriage to Gary was celebrated as kind of this gold standard of CCM marriages, but in reality it was unraveling. She'd been working with Vince Gill on a duet called House of Love. And in 1999, Amy and Gary divorced. And in 2000, Amy married Vince Gill. And the Christian community, well, there's no other way to say it. They basically hated her. Uninvited from Christian events, some Christian radio stations stopped playing her music, and she lost endorsement deals. The same people who'd been telling her that she was a gift from God when she was selling her records suddenly decided that she was not worth listening to. I find it kind of heartbreaking, not because I think divorce is no big deal. It is a big deal, but you would hope that Christians would do a little bit better helping her and giving kind of a good end to this story. But to the industry, it was not a story about a person. It was a story about a product. And this time, when the product stopped being what they expected, the customers walked away. So what was this era? It was the decade where CCM finally proved that it could compete with mainstream pop commercially. It learned to make hits. It stopped being a small ministry with a business and became a multi-million-dollar industry. And it was the decade where the lessons were pretty much learned from people who were doing it way before them. Andraé, the Winans, artists that had built this bridge, but the 80s did something else. It built the financial infrastructure that secular corporations were about to fall in love with. By 1991, when Amy Grant had a #1 pop hit, the Christian music industry was making serious money. The kind of money that big companies in London and New York start paying a lot of attention to. In the last episode, I told you about ABC buying a stake in Word in 1974. That was the trial run. The real takeover is about to start, and the people running those big secular companies, they don't give a crap about your ministry. In 1992, the first domino is going to fall. Every major Christian label in America was about to be bought. Every single one of them.